And that insults my intelligence, that she thinks that I'm going to accept that as a reasonable argument to make her president of the United States. Are you kidding me?
Hello and welcome to the Americano Show. I'm your guest host, Kate Andrews, and I'm joined today by Lionel Shriver, author and columnist for The Spectator. Lionel, thanks for joining me. Great to see you.
Always a pleasure.
Lionel, in your most recent column for The Spectator, you write that you are America's last undecided voter, representing so many Americans who can't quite make up their mind. Why have you struggled to decide who you're going to vote for?
Because I am being given two unacceptable choices. Actually, it's funny that the Spectator recently used in a headline the expression Hobsons Choice. And I looked up the meaning of Hobsons Choice to decide whether to use that expression in my column. And it's not quite a Hobson's choice, because a Hobson's choice is when you're being given a choice between two things, or perhaps many things, that really come down to the same thing. So that it's as if you are being given a choice, but it's not really a choice. You're really just stuck with one outcome. And I wouldn't say that that's true of this situation. In no way do I think that voting for Kamala Harris is exactly the same as voting for Donald Trump. And I do not believe that we're dealing with anywhere near the same larger outcome for the next 4 years. In fact, the contrast is fantastic. Unfortunately for me, it's a contrast between two dreadful outcomes. And the only comfort I take lately is that it's just possible that we're all being a bit hyperbolic, and maybe we'll be fine in the long run, regardless of which terrible president we have. That's what I landed on in the column, and that's where I've remained. I think that we're involved in an international hysteria in relation to the outcome of the U.S. election, and I wonder if it isn't a bit overblown. And ironically, I think that the most consequential difference between the two prospective presidents is what has not been an appreciable issue in the campaign, and that's foreign policy. And it's almost impossible to predict what exactly will come along to test the thus far apparently inadequate uh, abilities of either of these candidates. But it looks as if something would probably happen, and that will matter more than domestic policy. It will matter far more whether or not there's a tax on tips, which is one of the only things they agree
I'm
on.
going to say it's one of the policies that I think Harris took from Trump, and they both seem to agree on. You make an important point there, which is that it would be wrong to say that voting for either Harris or Trump gets you the same outcome. This is one of the few American elections in recent years that feels like Americans are being offered two really different choices in terms of philosophy and public policy. Now, sure, Harris has not been as upfront about what her real philosophy is, what drives her in politics, but I think a lot of voters can make up their minds on that, looking back to the policies that she endorsed as she was gearing up, say, to run to get the nomination in 2020. She's certainly on the progressive side of the Democratic
Oh yes,
Party.
and I think that I mean, it's my view that that somewhere in there she is aware of the fact that she's not up to this. She is not prepared to be president of the U.S. She's just not, and I think that the result of that incapacity is going to be her reliance on a field of advisors. And they are the same advisors that have been advising and even controlling the Biden White House. And there are plenty of people, I'm not in the know, so I just have to take their word for it. There are plenty of people who claim that these are the same people who advised or were in political control during the Obama years. And in fact, there was, I don't remember, maybe it was a Spectator piece, but I remember there's a recent headline about how, if Harris wins, then it will be the fourth Obama term. So I mean, so you can be pretty sure that we're going to have the same policies, and those are very aggressively progressive policies.
And there's a sense that she may be further to the left, and those advisors may see her presidency as an opportunity to move further to the left because America is being presented with two really different paths, one being the progressive left and one being the populist right. These are not the same offers. But it's interesting to me to go back. We had a conversation in January of this year on Spectator TV where we were both lamenting our options. In the past, Lionel, I think you've broadly characterized yourself, correct me if I'm wrong, as a never Trumper. As you say in your column, you just can't bring yourself to stake your own reputation, hard won, on the crazy things that this man might do. But you find at the time it was Biden, now it's Harris, but the joint ticket at the time just so difficult to get behind and to say anything nice about, really. It is quite depressing that nothing over the course of the year managed to sway you.
Oh yes, the switching out of the candidates hasn't really mattered, and after all, even during the campaign, Harris has not been able to point to a single policy that she would do differently if she were president rather than vice president. So, we just have to accept that, well, take her at her word that she'll continue with Biden policies. So it's not surprising, therefore, that I found the choice of Biden Trump depressing and paralyzing, and now I find the choice of Harris Trump equally depressing and paralyzing. I mean, it's still the same essential choice, and then you add on top of it. I mean, in some ways, this is also just kind of swapping one version of one thing for another. With Biden, you had a lot of incoherence because he was starting to become what euphemism are we lately using? Cognitively impaired.
He was struggling. He was very
with
clearly
Harris,
struggling.
She can't talk, and she spins. I mean, I think it's telling that we have all, I think, got sick of that expression, word salad, because it's in every article, and the reason we're sick of it is that she keeps tossing the same side dish, right?
Well, it's in every article because she's hard to quote.
But they're both kind of different forms of incoherence, and therefore, even on that front, it's pretty much the same problem.
Can I ask you, is it Trump the man that you struggle to vote for, or the MAGA policies and the MAGA intention behind it? Does J.D. Vance, for example, make you a little bit more interested in the Republican proposition? If this were a different candidate with the same policies and even potentially some of the same rhetoric, but not the same history of, for example, denying the election result, would you feel more confident voting Republican?
Oh, definitely. It's true that I've never voted Republican before, but I think in this election, given a different candidate, I would get over my historical reluctance and switch sides. Certainly, a lot of it is Trump the person, though. In terms of his behavior, you can't really draw a distinction between the person and the policies. That is, he did. I'm not happy with the way he behaved in January 6th, and that is behavior. That is not simply rhetoric. But if you dig down beneath all the bloviating and get down to particular policies, for the most part, I share more of his positions than I do of Harris's, if she has any. And therefore, one of the things that has been frustrating about this election for people like me, and I think that in terms of sensibility, there are a lot of people like me, that this is the perfect juncture to elect a sane, conservative candidate, because we have veered way too far left, and into some serious la la land areas in a way that I consider to be destructive of the republic. I mean, for example, I think throwing out meritocracy in the interests of racial preferences is catastrophic. And I do mean catastrophic. I mean, we're corrupting medical schools, for Pete's sake, so that, we're promoting people according to race and not because they know where your appendix is. I mean, this stuff is really scary, and I don't think it's small. I don't think it's petty, and so why can't this? We could easily have made that kind of what they call in the markets a correction, right? Back to the center, and that person would have won by a landslide. And the corruption of the parties is equal on both sides, as far as I can tell. You've got radicals in control of the Democratic Party, and its own form of radicalism in control in the Republican. I mean, I so wish we could have ditched Trump and moved on to someone else, and even someone like J.D. Vance. He doesn't have very much political experience, but neither did, say, Obama, right? So I differ with him on abortion, but I don't expect to agree on every point with candidates I vote for. So I would swallow that. I think he's very well spoken. I think that he's been portrayed as weirdly frightening by the Democrats, but I think what frightens them is his competence and his articulacy, and not so much that he promotes bonkers policies, but they are, right of center policies, and Democrats are afraid of Vance because they can't portray him as out to lunch, as someone who's not in control of himself, who's possibly demented, as demented as Biden. All the accusations, immoral. He certainly doesn't come across as immoral. He's really family oriented. He doesn't have any of that, I paying off porn star stuff. Yeah, I think for Democrats, he's very scary.
Well, I think that VP debate, was the broad sense was that JD Vance edged it. Really, it was a win for America because it was a very important reminder that these debates can be civil and friendly, and it doesn't have to be as truly horrendous as it has become. Lionel, you've been spending a lot of time in the States. What have you been picking up on? The sense is that Donald Trump seems to have some momentum at the moment, but at the same time, polls continue to come in to show Harris is certainly competitive. They seem to be neck and neck. What are you picking up on?
Well, personally, the same thing that all the articles that we're both reading say, that the Democrats are freaking out and are starting to assume that Trump has the advantage and is going to win. And even the Kamala Harris campaign people are freaking out. I can tell you that for certain because I now get at least 20 emails a day from her campaign. And the subject headlines are increasingly frantic and, threatening would-be donators to her campaign with, if you don't do something now, we're going to lose. I think that the Democrats are being paranoid, and I'm not making any predictions. It's a fool that makes a prediction a few days out from the election, because you're going to be so easily caught out.
And people will remember because you didn't make it a year ago. You made it a couple days before.
That's right. So I have no idea who's going to win, and I have no reason to know. I believe that people who do make predictions, especially at this juncture, are usually cannot tell the difference between what they're afraid of, what they want, and their own intuition. So I'm a little more anxious right now, just because I put so much energy into hating progressive policies for the last 10 years. So I'm weirdly a little more afraid of a Kamala outcome. So I kind of expect her to win. That's the
Well,
way
you're
it works. It's a
hedging.
weird.
Yeah, you're preparing.
So the Democrats who really dread a Trump presidency are now convinced that he's going to win. But it's the same thing. It's the fact that your fears are greater than your ambition, and this is a fear-driven election anyway. So it makes perfect sense that the Democrats are in freak out mode.
Well, on both sides as well. Donald Trump has always campaigned with elements of fear and vengeance and a sense that you have to win, otherwise, the other guy is going to do terrible things. Part of that will come certainly from his own experience, especially in New York with the courts. But he was doing that long before he was on trial for anything. It's interesting to watch the Democrats pivot to that fear agenda as well. It seems like they're trying to close this campaign on the message that Donald Trump is dangerous. The term fascist keeps being thrown around. And almost regardless of what you think of that or what you think of the accusations against Donald Trump and the kinds of things that he says, it is clearly a fear-driven closing message. It is not one of optimism or hope or what Harris can do for you. It's a message of what Donald Trump will do to you if he wins.
Yes. Oh, this is a totally negative campaign, and especially at the end of it, because she has so conspicuously failed to appeal to anyone in her media blitz. The media blitz, aka what any normal candidate would have been doing all along,
Also known as
just
interviews.
talking to the press. Um, but but her performance has been so vegetal, as we could say. I don't want to use the cliche again. That she's actually, I think, harmed herself by exposing how basically incompetent she is in front of a microphone. But I think that this purely negative campaign is unattractive. I don't think it's winning them any extra votes. And also resorting to the kind of hyperbole they've been using, I always think that backfires. I mean, all this, there's a line in one of my novels, someone says, that nothing speaks of the poverty of an argument than resorting to World War II. And that's what they've been doing repeatedly. All of this, it's 1939. It's Trump is Hitler. I mean, they're pulling out all the stops, but that makes you seem weak. That makes you seem you have run out of ammunition, right? You've gone nuclear. But when you repeat the very last of your weapons, if you keep using them, they don't work anymore. It's like, yeah, tell me another one. Yeah, okay, maybe he's like Attila the Hun, or a Trump presidency will be like an invasion from outer space. We're going to be taken over by, tentacled monsters 50 feet tall. I mean, it's just, what do you do? Where else do you go? And it comes across to me anyway as frankly pathetic. And that's not a very good note to end on. Now, I am not, however, predicting that Trump will necessarily win. If you look at the statistics, I mean, they're all, Trump is, as we speak, slightly ahead in some polls, but well within the margin of error, especially in the swing states that are going to make all the difference. So I think there's all to play for. And we have plenty of evidence in previous elections that the polls are often not only somewhat wrong, but wildly wrong. So it's not impossible that because nobody answers the telephone anymore, if they're sane, that there will be a near landslide on one side or the other, but it's impossible to say which side. And honestly, that's one of the reasons that everyone is so addicted to this story. And I mea culpa. I am completely stuffing this election down. and I'm going to miss it when it's gone.
Well, what you and I both have to admit is even though there's absolutely no love whatsoever for either candidate, they're fascinating. They're such characters, and nobody can look away.
I was just going to follow up. I think that's why this is such an international story, right? It's narrative.
You
This
rarely
is
get this kind of incredible political theater.
oh, this is suspense. This is better suspense than any airport novel, right? This will keep you this will keep you up through the flight and you'll actually eat the airline breakfast.
You won't have slept. You'll be very jet lagged. You mentioned that you have a slightly greater fear of Harris winning the election. But I was thinking if you're really unimpressed by both candidates, perhaps the best outcome for somebody who is just deeply, as you said, paralyzed and cynical about the outcome of this election. Perhaps the best outcome is a divided Congress. You want a mix of the parties in there in the different positions so that they can't do very much. And if you think that the Republicans have a decent shot at the Senate, if you think that the House is going to favor the Republicans too, perhaps you do want Harris in the Oval Office.
One way or the other, I want it to be split up. And I pretty routinely hope that we have a divided Congress. Um, I am afraid of government broadly, and therefore, if government is constrained, we are less likely to be inflicted by bonkers policies. And so, yes, I hope that different parties control each house. Um, it does look as if the Republicans are likely to take the Senate. Um, so I and Democrats definitely have a chance at the House. So I guess in that circumstance, it wouldn't really matter whether it was Trump or Harris because either way, their hands would be somewhat tied.
Their hands are
And
tied.
it would be also better if this control of each House of Congress had enough of uh, a little bit extra to make it not so much on a knife edge so that you wouldn't have the Joe Manchin problem, right? Which, for example, he was able to stop all kinds of Biden legislation because he was a half-hearted Biden Democrat. So therefore, he had huge amounts of power. I think it's better not to be in that position, though. I mean, I'm grateful for Manchin.
Oh, a
He
Democrat who
stopped.
challenged his party, absolutely.
Absolutely. He was one of the only constraints on the Biden White House, and I'm grateful to him. But I think, yeah, I think we're always better off with a presidency that can't do much.
Hmm. Lionel, how does this all move on? Because you and I both voted for Joe Biden, not with any kind of pep in our step back in 2020. And I won't speak for you. I mean, the reason I did that is because I wanted to move on from the Trump era. I wanted, as you say, for a sensible Republican to come through who, in this election, if they were running against Harris, would be looking at a huge victory. That didn't happen. That did not pan out. And I wonder now, even though Trump is getting older, even though it feels like if he were to lose running for a fourth time, it just seems absurd. Running for a third time seemed absurd a couple years ago. You know, is there any process through which politics starts to move on?
I mean, I don't know how much of a figure on the scene Trump would be over the next administration if he loses this one also. Um, he could still be a problem. We could still have a small zombie rising from the grave thing. Um, but I think this is his last shot at being president. And if he's not going to be president, and if he's lost again, he's surely going to have less influence in the Republican Party, and they will have to inaugurate someone else. And it's looking at, from this vantage point, at least, that maybe that would be J.D. Vance, unless he were contaminated by having been the running mate of a failed candidate, a doubly failed candidate. And maybe they would want to pivot altogether somewhere else. But either way, I really want to see a resurrected Republican Party because the Democratic Party, as currently constructed, desperately needs a viable alternative with decent, plausible conservative policies, and decent, plausible conservative candidates.
Lionel, last question. You are still America's last undecided voter, and you have no love for either candidate. But do you suspect that when the polls close and the exit polls start rolling in and the information starts landing, and we have that moment in 2016, it was Ohio. We have a moment in 2024 where Pennsylvania looks like it's about to be called, or Michigan or Wisconsin, and you see which way it's going. Do you think your gut is going to tell you which one deep down you really wanted to see win?
Well, I've described my conundrum before as a little bit of a head heart problem. I completely understand people for whom Trump is a huge emotional trigger and he just sends them into apoplexy. Uh, and somehow I've never been one of those people. He more inspires a casual disgust and, you know, oh, for pity's sake, right? Which is different from fury. You know, I know plenty of people whom he enrages, and he doesn't do that to me. And I've always been one of those people who um, is calmer about it. I'm not. I don't think he's going to become a dictator. I think he's too ineffectual for that. I don't think he has um, the concentration. You know, I just don't think he'd be able to follow through on it because he would meet an awful lot of resistance on that score. So he doesn't frighten me, um, and therefore that's a low. You know, that disgust thing. It's not revulsion. It's just that we do better. You know, whereas Harris does enrage me. Okay, I mean, you can say that this is maybe it's I've got my proportions, my sense of proportion mixed up, but I can't change it emotionally. I feel she insults my intelligence when she goes into these long rambles, which are really just meant to fill time. You know, she has nothing to say. She's actually, you know, a deer in the headlights, cannot answer the question, can't calculate fast enough what answer is in her interests, which means that she doesn't actually have an answer that she believes in. She's constant. You can actually hear the wheels spinning in her head. Uh, what am I supposed to say and what is to my advantage? And meanwhile, I'm just going to run out the clock. And that's what she does with every single answer. So she's lines up a bunch of adjectives, which all basically mean the same thing. And she starts making lists of things that we already know. So it's all filler. And that insults my intelligence that she thinks that I'm going to accept that as a reasonable argument to make her president of the United States. Are you kidding me? And furthermore, you know, absolutely no acknowledgement about having 180'd her position on a whole host of extremely important issues. Next, not even making clear positions on other, you know, positions of foreign policy. You know, she's said very little about Ukraine. She said very little or nothing about China. She said she's talked out of two sides of her mouth in relation to Israel and refuses to make a forceful defense of Israel, especially if she's in the presence of Palestinian supporters. She won't pay the price of taking a position that supports Israel, which is cowardly. And you can't have it both ways when you're president. You know, you either fund them and back them in a position of authority, or you don't. I mean, everything she does drives me nuts. And there's also a textural problem. I think she's a fraud. I think she has no idea, at least politically, who she is. Now, maybe behind closed doors with her family, she is a person, and she has a center in her character. But in political terms, she is a cipher. She would tell you anything that they told her to say, and I find her persona artificial. She laughs constantly. We all know that. But most notably, she laughs when no one has said anything that is funny, right? She laughs out of nervousness and also to fill time, right? Takes up space, but not because she has a sense of humor. In fact, I have yet to see a single sign of a sense of humor. And this may be a little eccentric, but that's one of the main things I hold against anybody. So
I don't think you're alone in that.
when I get to the results, whenever they come in, I anticipate that I will feel irked if it seems as if she's going to win. On the other hand, if it seems as if Trump is going to win, I'm going to be deflated. I will not feel victorious. I will feel anxious. And to the extent that I am seeming to endorse him right now, which I hope I am not, I will feel terrified of seeming to have endorsed him, right? Because I don't trust him, and I don't want to take responsibility for his administration. And that, by the way, this whole neutrality thing, I accept it is cowardly, that it does not help anyone, especially who's voting in a swing state where their vote not only counts, but, we're told it is going to determine the future of the whole world. So it's not helpful, and I don't think my neutrality position did anything but describe a place that a lot of Americans find themselves in. And that may be comforting, but it's not helpful.
Well, I find it helpful. You've described it very well. And there will be plenty of Americans listening to this podcast who are going to vote on polling day, for whom they are not deciding between which candidate they like more. They are deciding which candidate they cannot tolerate. And frankly, Lionel, you have laid out incredibly well the downsides, the irk, and the deflation that you would feel are both pretty negative emotions, but you have laid out quite perfectly the reasons that perhaps you would not support either candidate. And frankly, I think that's how a lot of Americans are going into this election. It's a tough one, but as said, absolutely fascinating. Lionel, thanks for joining Americano.
Enjoyed talking to you, Kate.